brought together. Well, a recent study shows that 30% of Fortune 100 companies are actually using the same cybersecurity software that left Equifax vulnerable 2 years ago. That, of course, exposed the personal details of over 145 million Americans. For more on this, we're joined now by Bill Karpovich, the vice president at cybersecurity software company Sonatype. Bill, great to have you on with us this afternoon.
Yeah, thanks. Great to be here.
All right, so let's talk about some of this software, because if that is the case, that they are using the same software, I mean, these companies are in trouble, no?
They could be, right? Equifax has made huge progress, but what we've seen is that these building blocks that companies use to build software, which is a huge phenomenon, the reality is that folks aren't taking the care to make sure they're really safe, right? It's as if your kid is building a house of Legos and they're going out in the street and picking up these different Legos from wherever they may find them without making sure they're really safe before they get used.
So what are the steps that consumers and the corporations need to take upon themselves to make sure that they are simpatico with these cybersecurity software systems?
Well, you think about it, software, every company is a software company now, right? And it's really, this onus here largely falls on the people who are building software. You know, a car battery now has 1,000 lines of code in it, right? So software is everywhere, it's running everything that we do. And as it turns out, is 90% of that code, you don't build it from scratch. You use these Lego pieces, right? You take building blocks, and those pieces are called open source libraries. And what has to happen is people have to realize, number one, that when they pick up those pieces for free, there might be free code, but there's no free lunch, right? You really have to make sure you're using the best pieces, and you got to track them throughout the life cycle.
So are you saying then the main issue with a lot of the cybersecurity breaches falls on the software and not on maybe the staff and the employees inside the company, or?
Yeah, that's a great question. There's all this focus on protecting networks, right? And people doing the nefarious things inside. The reality is the biggest, the most rapidly growing threat surface is the software itself. And that's where about 70–80% of the breaches come from. And since so much of that software is based on these components, that's also a new threat surface. Over the last 5 years, open source attacks have increased by 71%. 25% of companies last year said they had a breach through these open source components. So it's a major and really critical threat surface.
It feels like we cover all too many of these cybersecurity breaches that happen. Are there certain companies that need to do a better job, companies that you can name that need to do a better job to take care of this?
We could name them, but we will not.
Why?
Well, we'll say certainly Equifax has done a great job. As you said, about 30 of the Fortune 100 are still using this old component, okay? And in our most recent study, we also found that there's a pretty clear path to resolving this, okay? So you won't hear about it quite as much. And one of the parts of it is pretty intuitive. The other part is actually a little counterintuitive. Right, the first piece is you got to be mindful of this. You have to have a program that says, hey, we're not going to let any one of these Lego blocks into the door before we inspect it. And you have to have a tool set that allows you to analyze them and keep track of them, right? So that's basic, that's core, and there's companies like us and others who are in the business helping people do that. The part that's counterintuitive is that the way to make sure that you're updating these things so you don't have stale and old components, because that's what happens. Something gets announced that it's bad, you need to upgrade it. So the way to protect yourself is to go faster.
Okay.
And we found that companies that release, if they release 2 times faster than their competition, they're much more likely to have these problems resolved before an attacker can go at them, right? And that's counterintuitive because most people say to be more secure, you go slow.
Yeah.
And we're saying to be more secure, go fast.
Well, what about in your, inside of your own company, what are some of the best ways that you try to inspire your teams to collaborate faster on these projects to make sure that even your own systems are secure?
Well, certainly, we eat our own dog food in terms of making sure that when we bring in these parts from the outside, there's a rigorous analysis of those. We run them through our tools and so forth. And and the teams are constantly collaborating using all the modern collaboration tools that you would imagine. So those are all part of it.
Have we yet seen the full scope of the Equifax breach? Because I feel like that is so poignant still in people's minds.
Well, I think it was just a moment in time where they became the poster child for what could go wrong. If you don't take care of all of these pieces that you're relying on, you have a lot of exposure. And what we've seen is that in spite of that being everywhere, and you guys have talked about, everyone has talked about this for well over 2 years now, people still aren't taking all the care that they can to solve the problem. And it is a solvable problem.
And I guess on the breach side, it's obviously devastating when we hear our own personal information is released to bad actors and onto the dark web, but what about on the enterprise side if a breach happens and business data is stolen? What is the risk there?
First of all, the enterprises are largely holding this consumer information, right? So a lot of the data that we hold as enterprises is just that, and it's of our customers, right? So if the consumer loses trust, they're not going to lose trust in the internet, they're going to lose trust in the company who had that data, right? And then of course beyond that, there's other internal data that of course can put a company at risk in all the ways it can imagine. So, unequivocally, this is very important. The software is controlling the data, right? So the software is the gatekeeper to the crown jewels, and that's what we saw at Equifax. And if you have a window open or a door open in the software, they're going to be able to get to that really important core asset of the company.
All right, Bill Karpovich, he's the Vice President of Cybersecurity Software Company Sonatype. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks, great to be here.
Thank you. And this segment has been brought to you by the all-new GoTo.